Okay, Divya, we are ready.
यज्ञेन यज्ञमयजन्त देवास्तानि धर्माणि प्रथमान्यासन्ना ते हनाकं महिमानः सचन्त यत्र पूर्वे साध्या सन्ति देवाः अथ घनपाठः यज्ञेन यज्ञमयजन्ताय जन्त यज्ञेन यज्ञमयजन्ताय जन्त यज्ञमयजन्त देवा अयजन्त यज्ञमयजन्त देवा अयजन्त देवा अयजन्त देवास्तानि तानि देवा अयजन्त देवास्तानि तानि देवास्तानि धर्माणि तानि देवास्तानि धर्माणि तानि धर्माणि तानि धर्माणि प्रथमानि धर्माणि तानि धर्माणि प्रथमानि धर्माणि प्रथमानि धर्माणि प्रथमान्यासन्नासन् प्रथमानि धर्माणि प्रथमान्यासन्ना प्रथमान्यासन्नासन् प्रथमान्यासन्ना आसन्नित्यासन्ना ते हरे ते हनाकं हते ते हनाकं नाकं महिमानो नाकं हनाकं महिमानः नाकं महिमानो नाकं महिमानः सचन्त महिमानो नाकं महिमानः सचन्त महिमानो महिमानः सचन्त यत्र सचन्त महिमानो महिमानः सचन्त यत्र सचन्त यत्र पूर्वे यत्र सचन्त यत्र पूर्वे यत्र पूर्वे साध्या पूर्वे यत्र पूर्वे साध्याः पूर्वे साध्या पूर्वे साध्या सन्ति साध्या पूर्वे साध्या सन्ति साध्या सन्ति साध्या सन्ति देवा सन्ति साध्या सन्ति देवाः सन्ति देवा सन्ति देवाः देवा इति घनपाठः।
Thank you so much. And with that, we will begin with our plenary session. Our first speaker today will be Professor Rukmani. I know those of you who have been attending this conference, she needs no introduction. After a very distinguished career, spread pretty much all over the world, starting from India to South Africa to Canada, and now back to India. Her meticulous research and scholarship, everybody in this field, they know. So I'm not going to spend too much time reintroducing her, except to give some personal reflections I had the good fortune of meeting her for the first time in 2004. And the event was a 3-day intense session on the Brahma Sutra with Shankara Bhashya. A very few number of us with her for 3 full days. It was a wonderful experience. And the last time when we met her physically at UMass Dartmouth for our 23rd conference, something happened because of which she was physically hurt and she was not able to move between sessions. So I got a wonderful opportunity to chat with her, and I discovered, the person who kind of inspired me into study of Upanishads and Vedanta is Swami Ranganathananda of the Ramakrishna Mission. And Professor Rukmani told me that she was very close to Swami Ranganathanandaji, and Swami Ranganathanandaji instructed her to give lectures at various venues. So I really am indebted to Professor Rukmani. And when we planned for this event, as you know, the original thought was it would be just like the regular in-person physical meeting, but when that couldn't happen, then of course we had to go into this virtual mode. But we thought we would appreciate the services of Professor Rukmani for over 6 decades. And as Professor Pappu said yesterday, there is a tradition of this conference whereby we honor one person at a particular session. So the original thought was to honor Professor Rukmani with a plaque and with a shawl, but as you know, online that is not possible. So what I will do is I will share with you the plaque that we will give her when one of us goes to Bangalore, which we hope should be very shortly in the next few months or so. So I will share with you the contents of the plaque right now. Give me just a moment, please. There we go. You should be able to see this on your screen. And I will just read it out to you. It says, presented to Professor Trichur S. Rukmani, to express our deep appreciation for meticulous scholarship in Sanskrit and Indian philosophy during the past 6 decades, for her indefatigable efforts in forcing mainstream Western academia to acknowledge the Indic knowledge systems pertaining to philosophy, religion, and spirituality, her mentorship of students in Indic studies, thus spreading the mission and goals of the International Congress of Vedanta, and selfless service to the dissemination of Indic traditions in India and in the Indian diaspora. So, with that, let us go to Professor Rukmani for her plenary talk. This will be on ethical issues in the Mahabharata. As you know, the Mahabharata is perhaps the most comprehensive text available. And the Mahabharata, that very famous sloka, yadi asti tatanyatra yanne ha asti natat kvachit. So whatever has been human questions, society's questions, they have been dealt with in the Mahabharata. So today we will hear from Professor Rukmani some ethical issues which are dealt with in this famous Dharma Shastra, and more importantly, how they can help us in navigating through ethical, moral dilemmas that all of us face sometime or the other. So with that, Professor Rukmani, over to you. Professor Rukmani, you are muted. So if you could unmute yourself, please.
Yes.
Yes.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can see you and hear you as well. So please go ahead.
All right. Acha. Well, Sukalyan, I'm overwhelmed. I mean, the way you have, I really have no words to thank the entire you and your team for this great honor which you have bestowed on me. I didn't even think for a moment that I deserve it, but in your estimation and in your team's estimation, you seem to think that I deserve it. And I'm really, as I said, overwhelmed. I accept it with great humility, and I look forward to somebody coming to Bangalore, and of course, we'll follow it from there. And of course, I want to add, again, you're inviting me over, which again is a wonderful opportunity to touch base with most of our friends in the Vedanta circle. Well, I'll start off with my paper already. So I'm given 45 minutes?
Yes, madam. 45 minutes is perfectly all right.
All right. So, there is this saying in the West that India has no moral philosophy, because they think just because we did not develop a subject known as moral philosophy, we are devoid of any morality. It's like saying because Sanskrit does not have a word for religion, we do not have religion at all. So one of the things so I'm going to do a little comparison to begin with to set the stage how Indian moral theories differ from the way the West has approached moral theories. The West's emphasis has always been on the individual. So right from Aristotle down to, I would say, Kant or even later, they all insisted on, let's say, virtue ethics, utilitarian ethics, categorical imperative, whatever. Everything was individual-centered. So none of these theories could satisfy. Let's take virtue, for example. For me, speaking the truth might be the best virtue, but for a thief, telling a lie would be the best virtue. So this contradiction between individuals' preferences did not go well with this theory, let's say, and so also with even utilitarian theory, the greatest good for the greatest number. What is the thing which will give the greatest happiness to the greatest number? You can't decide on that particular item which would give that. So there are these troubles, and so even today they have not come to the end of discussion in theoretical, because theirs is a theoretical way of looking at moral theory. But on the other hand, let's go to the Indian scene. What happened with India was, we have what is known as two important, our core text is of course always the Rig Veda. When you go to the Rig Veda, you find two very important trends of thought. One is an intellectual freedom to discuss a particular subject from many points of view, and then come to the conclusion, and again, not in a dogmatic manner. Let us look at the so-called creation theory, which I don't like this word at all. I always call it as Nasadiya Sukta. So what does the Nasadiya Sukta start with? Says, the Rishi is speculating as to the origin. Today we talk about the origin of the world, origin of the universe. This is the perennial question which has troubled our Rishis as well. So this Rishi starts off by saying, was there existence then? Nasad asid, nosad asid. So was there existence or non-existence? Was there darkness or water? What was there in the beginning? It's a very short sukta with just 7 mantras. And the last mantra is the most important. He says, this question cannot be answered. I'm doubtful whether even the devas know the answer to this question. Now look at the Catholicity. They are willing to agree that they don't have the last answer. And they are even saying that even the best amongst us, the devas are after all divinized human beings. Even they don't have the answer. Now, that is one side of it. The second very important Rigvedic contribution or the Vedic contribution is a holistic approach, because they very early, the rishis understood that we are individuals in a cosmos, and there is a symbiotic relationship between the individual and the cosmos. And it is on the basis of that they have this intuitive insight to come up with this beautiful concept of Rita. Now, Rita, according to the text, means a physiological. Rita is the one which controls or regulates the physiological and moral order in the universe. Physiological is very easy to understand. After all, the sun sets in the west, rises in the east. Water always flows from top to bottom. But as far as they didn't leave it at that, a moral order. Now, what is this moral order? Naturally, there cannot be a precise definition of moral order, but Varuna was assigned to look after this particular portfolio, let's call it in modern terminology, and anybody who goes against a moral order will be punished. I mean, to that extent. And how do they define it? They do not define, because it's impossible to define. According to them, it's an intuitive insight. Anybody who lives an ideal life will be able to intuit the Rita, just intuit it. That's all one can say. Now, this Rita continued for quite some time. Even in the Upanishads, we get it. But by the time of the Upanishads, a change has taken place. The word dharma has come into being. You'll be surprised to know, as far as the Rig Veda is concerned, though the word is there, the kind of changes of meaning which came into the word dharma is not there in the Rig Veda. But actually, it is in the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, which one could assign to from the 8th century to the 9th century BC, that we first get a beautiful 3 or 4 places where this concept of dharma is mentioned. One of them is that Brahman, after creating all the 4 varnas, was still not satisfied. Then what did it do? After all, Brahman is neuter, as we know, so I can't say he. So Brahman then created dharma, and where did he put it in? He put it into the Kshatriya's chest. That is a king. And what is the significance of that? It means that the king is being instructed or even commanded to rule according to dharma. So this is a beautiful statement, and the concept of dharma, if you do not conduct yourself in a dharmic manner, the cosmos itself will be disturbed. That holistic concept was also not lost. Now, when it comes to this unitive vision, I have 2 examples here, which gives you how it was projected. As I said, the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, what it did was that slowly it naturally developed. After all, a concept always cannot stand static. It develops over the course of time. And the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad itself then has 2 parables which expands on the notion of dharma. One of them is that you have Prajapati instructing his children, the Devas, the Manushas, and the Asuras, telling them to practice Dhamma, Daya, and what else is there? I'm forgetting that particular one. So let me look it up. I've written it somewhere.
Dhanam.
Dhamma, Dana, and Daya. You see, that is very important, because Karna ruined himself because of his Dana. So these 3 principles are being it comes for the first time in the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad. Another very important concept which comes in the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad is again the Panchayatnas. The Panchayatnas, again, this holistic notion has not been forgotten. And the Panchayatnas, we owe so many things. When we live in the world, nobody comes in as an individual. We owe our existence. As far as knowledge is concerned, we owe it to our ancestors. They have we inherit what they have given us. So also, as far as the devas are concerned, unless the arrogance of the human species we do not have, this is according to Brihadaranyaka, and then our ancestors, without our ancestors, we wouldn't be here. So the Brihadaranyaka says we owe a debt to these three, and more important comes the next two. It says there is Manushya Rana as well as Bhuta Rana. Now, what is Manushya Rana? It is being very kind to your fellow beings. They, of course, paraphrase it as hospitality. And Bhuta, when I first mentioned it in my class, they all said, Bhuta, demons or ghosts? I said, no. Bhuta in Sanskrit means all living beings. So here, the Brihadaranyaka literally says, you have to include the animals, the birds, and now comes the surprise, even the little ants. You say you have to look after each one of living beings in the world. So that is, again, the holistic notion has not been forgotten. Let us come to now you might think this is all individually you're being instructed as to do things, but the social aspect of Dharma has also not been forgotten. You know that, I think most of you know it, Taittiriya Upanishad comes in here, and our Guru Shishya, after the Shishya has finished his Gurukula Vasa, he's going back home, and you know that Satyam Vada, Dharmam Chara, all those things. Now, here is a social consciousness being instilled into the student. You cannot really, you don't stand alone in the world. And these values, people have forgotten these values. And I would insist on one very important value which is being instructed. Matra Devo Bhava, Pitra Devo Bhava, Acharya Devo Bhava, Atithi Devo Bhava, Shraddha. Then all those I'm not translating, you know that. But that is a social value, because normally we think that individual does not exist in a vacuum. So the social values are you pay respect to all these people. And let me tell you, in India, since we are living here nowadays, that aspect of Indian culture is very much alive even today. And that is due to our Vedic culture. Then the other thing is, it says, Atithi Devo Bhava Shraddhaya Deyam. See, this is very important. It's not nowadays, people have a lot of money and they think that they are throwing, money in order to help philanthropic activities. They said, no, the Upanishad wants you. If you are going to give something as dana, Shraddhaya Deyam, Ashraddhaya Adeyam. So this is a very important value which has been inculcated in the Upanishads. Let us now go on to because I know my topic is the Mahabharata, and I've spent some time because one has to really put it in a particular context. As you all know, texts are in context. By the time we come to the Mahabharata, the whole scenario has changed. After all, the historical period in which the Mahabharata is placed is somewhere between 400 BC to 400 AD. So I'm still using the old, you can say BCE to CE. So almost 800 to 1000 years is the period given to the Mahabharata composition. Now, what are the historical changes which have taken place? The Mauryas had come into being. No more Kshatriya has ruled. After all, Maurya, Ashoka, was not a Kshatriya. He was, as you know, Chanakya and that whole episode. So this Maurya, Chandragupta Maurya, he was a devotee of Buddhist ideas. He propagated a lot of Buddhist, his edicts, as you all know, talk very much about ahimsa, that is non-violence. So, and a lot of people were converting to Buddhism. So this was the milieu in which, of course, finally the Mauryas got defeated and the Guptas came to power. Now here there was an attempt to revive Vedic culture. So you see the struggle. The Mahabharata is a very important text in order to actually study the struggle between the Buddhists Buddhist ideas, I would say, and Vedic ideas. And one of the Vedic ideas, as you all know, of course, I should also mention, I forgot that, because in the Vedic period and right up to the Dharma Sutras, it is the Varnashrama Dharma, which was in circulation. But by now, we also have the Sadharana Dharma. And the Sadharana Dharma is, I'm sure all of you know, Ahimsa Satya Steya, Brahmacharya Parigraha. Now, Ahimsa, you will notice the importance of Ahimsa being put right at the beginning. And the Mahabharata in many places, they have some definitions of Dharma, Dharyate di Dharma, Ahimsa Sakalo Dharma. See, that's important, not just Ahimsa Dharma, it says Ahimsa Sakalo Dharma. Then, of course, there are quite a few. And it also adds, can never come to know the real secret of Dharma, Dharmasya, Tattvam Nihitam Guhayam, as you all know. So here, what happened was, so there is a clash between Vedic ethical values and Buddhist ethical values. And in many places, we get that. One of the things I will tell you is of Ahimsa and Satya, non-violence and truth. These are the two very important. Of course, the others are important, but they are more individual based. These are more socially based because it can affect other than you. So what, and of course, again, I'm sure most of you know this Kaushika, who was sitting in, doing tapasya. When he opened his eyes, some travelers came that way and they crossed and they turned into one side. And then the robbers who were chasing them came after them and they asked the Rishi, did you see those travelers? Where did they go? And he said, they went this way. So naturally, he was sticking to Satya as a personal value. He had vowed that he will, under no circumstances, it's almost by Kant, its categorical imperative. So he did more. He said they went this way. They, of course, followed, got hold of the travelers and killed all of them. Now, the moral of the story is this person, he went to hell, Naraka, because Vyasa mentioned specifically his Satya completely did not earn him Swarga, but his one lie, which resulted in the killing of so many people, finally ended up in his attaining Naraka. So now there was this whole, I'm sure Sukalyan, you as a Bengali might know this. This story or legend was debated by Bankim Chandra Chatterjee as well as Rabindranath Tagore for a long time in the Bengali newspapers, because Rabindranath Tagore took one stand, Bankim Chandra took another stand. And why I'm saying this is, the Mahabharata stories are not something living in the past. We use them even today, and in order to actually valorize whatever we are doing or trying to justify our not doing it. Now, let us come to Arjuna, for instance. Again, this clash between Vedic Dharma and Sadharana Dharma is coming here. Arjuna on the battlefield, of course, he had decided to fight. And that's why the whole battle was, the whole thing started taking place. But once he came to the battlefield, he started feeling nervous, looking at all the clansmen, as well as, Ahimsa. Now here, there is a clash between Ahimsa Dharma as well as your Vedic Dharma. As far as Vedic is concerned, Varnashrama, he is a Kshatriya and he is bound to fight. And he has come prepared to fight on the battlefield. But when he sat there and looked at it, and Kula Dharma, now you see here, the clashes are between this Kula Dharma. He looks at all the people, there are his kinsmen, his gurus, and this is what is known as, he feels obliged to respect the Kula Dharma. And on the other hand, he feels that how can I indulge in non-violence? So this clash, moral, of course, Matilal calls it, our late Professor Matilal calls it a moral dilemma, and which is correct. And the answer he gives, I'll come to that later. But eventually, of course, I don't have to mention that. It was Krishna who persuaded him. And finally, he says, Yadichasi tat kuru. I mean, Krishna doesn't tell him to do what to do, but he just tell him, okay, I've told you all this, Yadichasi tat kuru. But finally he ended up by fighting, because that here the Vedic Dharma superseded the Sadharana Dharma. So again, the clash comes to the forefront. Now, you all know again, I'm not saying anything new. Yudhisthira's half-truth. I call it half-truth because, when they could not really kill Drona, because as long as Ashwatthama, his son, was alive, he was invincible. So they could not defeat him. Here, so naturally, Krishna, as usual, who played the trickster in so many situations, advised him, and he would not believe anybody saying anything unless it is the Yudhisthira himself. So Yudhisthira was coached to say that Ashwatthama hataha narova kunjarova. And of course, when he said kunjarova, they started beating the drums under Krishna's instruction. And so he only heard naro. And naraha, naturally Ashwatthama, his son, is killed. Drona immediately threw down his arrow, bow and arrow, and he was killed. So again, this is, what is it? Yudhisthira, a person who had vowed never to tell a lie, Satya. I'm talking about the Sadharana Dharma, Ahimsa, Satya. And here the Satya was broken forever, and he knew he was breaking it. And that is why when in the last Swargarohana Parva, Yudhisthira did not go straight to heaven. He had to wait for some time. Even Duryodhana was there before he was there. Now, let us give up. Now, let's come to Karna. Karna again gave up his kundalas and kavicha to whom? To Indra. Indra, who is Arjuna's father. And he knew very well these are the two which protects him against the enemy. But again, if you go back to the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, remember that value of dana which Prajapati had instructed his children with. So that concept of dana is the one that Karna picked on, and he, throughout his life, he was sticking to that value. And of course, by doing that, he completely lost the strength and killed. And of course, I won't go into Ghatotkacha and all that. Now, the most important, according to me at least, the value, the ethical value, which we learn from the Mahabharata, is the selfless action of Yudhisthira. Of course, selfish is karmanyevadikaraste is already there in the Bhagavad Gita. But in practice, where was it really exhibited in practice? It is in the Yaksha Prashna, when the Yaksha, as all the four brothers had gone there, disobeyed the Yaksha, and they were lying dead. Then comes Yudhisthira, and of course, as usual, Yudhisthira was not in a hurry. He was willing to answer all the questions. And Yaksha was happy, and he said, okay, you asked me, I will give you a boon. You can get one of your brothers alive. So, and who do you think Yudhishthira asked for? He asked for Nakula. Nakula is the twin brother of Sahadeva. And the Yaksha was hoping or was thinking that he would ask for Arjuna or Bhima. But no, he went and requested the Yaksha to bring back Nakula alive. The Yaksha himself was surprised. He said, how on earth or why on earth did you ask for Nakula instead of Arjuna or Bhima? He said, the answer of Yudhishthira really takes your mind, it boggles your mind. At least I felt so, I was emotionally affected by this. He said that Kunti already has a son in me, but Madri's son, if I opt for Bhima or Arjuna, Madri will be left with no son. The argument that Madri is not living cannot be used here because it is the concept of Madri's son. And the Yaksha was so pleased. He said, okay, let all your four brothers live. Now look at this value, the value which Yudhisthira, the amount, it's not, of course, he was very much dedicated to truth. That's one side of him. But here is total selfless action and also consideration for the other person. So that is again very important. Now I have one more, again, to illustrate the contradiction or the value system which the Vedic culture and the Sadharana Dharmas were going through. There is this episode which Professor Hiriana in his Outlines of Indian Philosophy mentions, and there a Brahmana was trying to do a sacrifice, and the sacrifice, he said, okay, because of the changed conditions, he was using rice, flowers, and things like that. He did not want to sacrifice an animal, and so he was preparing for that. A deer was standing nearby, and the deer was surprised. He went up to the Brahmana and said, please sacrifice me, because that is the way the Vedic sacrifice has to be done. But the Brahmana kept insisting, saying, no, I will not do it, because I do not believe in violence. Of course, on the insistence of the deer, who kept on saying, if you do it, the punya is for me, I will go to heaven, because your sacrificing me is going to benefit me more than you. I mean, that itself is a philosophical question and an ethical question. We can discuss that. But look at this. Now, the Brahmana is changed. The Varna Dharma, he has changed himself, but still in the Vedic culture, trying to come back, makes this statement. Vyasa makes this statement. And of course, what happened was the deer was dharma he was actually dharma. So when Yudhisthira, the Brahmana, tried to kill the deer, he disappeared and became dharma. And again, the usual, he went to heaven. So these are many, many ethical issues which you find in the Mahabharata. And the lesson that we learn from this is that when there are clash of cultures, this is a clash of culture. The Mahabharata stands for periods. There are many, many periods which are depicted in the Mahabharata. And one of the values which is trying to be portrayed is vegetarianism. So in some places, vegetarianism is, of course, praised. But on the other hand, naturally, the Vedic Brahmanas were not vegetarians. So there are these value clashes, and the Mahabharata is a wonderful text to bring out these very important clashes. Now, how does Professor Matilal, the late Professor Matilal, solve this ethical problem? He calls them situational dharma. See, suppose there is a issue. Let's say you want to do both X and Y because both are equally important. Let's say your mother is in the hospital, but your child is suffering at home. Do you leave your child and go to your mother in the hospital, or do you look after the child and let the mother be looked after by somebody else? Now, this moral dilemma which disturbs an individual, which happens, this is a real life situation. So he says, how do you decide which is more important? And then he says, we have this intuitive way of deciding. It's almost like Kant saying in the categorical imperative that you have practical reason which will dictate what is the right action to be done. But here, what he says is, Matilal says, that the situation itself will tell you how to act in that particular situation. So he calls it situational dharma. So that's a beautiful concept again. Now, why do we come up with all these concepts? Because it's so difficult for us to reconcile these different kinds of moral dilemmas which we find in the Mahabharata. Karna again. I'm coming to Karna. Krishna and Kunti both go to him to plead for him to join the Pandava group before the war. But what did he do? he stuck to loyalty, friendship, Sakhitva. He said, no, Duryodhana has looked after me. I am loyal to him. And so I will not, in spite of everything, he said, no, I will not go and join the Pandavas. So you see, at every stage, some value or the other is being projected, and it is actually didactic. That's why they say the Mahabharata is not just a narrative poem. And by the way, I do not call it an epic, it's a cultural text. It's our whole culture is embedded in the Mahabharata. Even today, I mean, let's come to Draupadi, for instance. Now, you see, Draupadi, her question was never answered. Here is a moral dilemma. A question put to Bhishma, supposed to be the great dharmic person, just sat quiet there and did not even open his mouth. I mean, that was the worst, because you have another incident in the Udyoga Parvan when Bhishma got up and left the council chamber when they were trying to misbehave with Krishna. So he knows what to do. But as far as Draupadi's incident is concerned, he did not even get up and go away from the council chamber. He was sitting there tight and did not even bother to answer Draupadi. Now, what is this clash? I mean, and you know the reason he gave? Because you cannot be disloyal to the hand which serves you. That means he's earning his living from the Kauravas, and so he cannot really be disloyal to him. So these are the many, many ways you can really look at the Mahabharata, and you see ethical issues being, sometimes it boggles your mind, as I said, because you cannot even imagine that these solutions will strike you. I think I will stop here. Sukalya? Do I have still some time? No, I think I'm.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to speak for another 5-10 minutes, that's fine.
I do not want, but if there are questions, I would like to answer.
Okay, so let's then see.
I hope you got something out of it.
Yes, very, very good. So we are now open to questions. I mean, typically, Professor Rukmani, in the plenary session, we do not have a Q&A session.
Oh, really? Okay.
But I mean, there is not a hard and fast rule.
I don't want to interfere with your
no
the way you have planned it.
So as you start thinking and give your questions in the chat box, let me just make a few comments. For those of you who are kind of younger generation and you are Sanskritists or dealing with Sanskrit texts, just see how Professor Kapil Kapoor yesterday and Professor Rukmani today, they desisted strongly from these translations. These translations of these words like dharma and rita and brahman, they have caused so much problems. So I hope you take these two talks and some more to follow to be very careful when you try to translate these. And we now have a number of people who are attesting to that there are some untranslatable words in Sanskrit. So please keep that in mind. And as Professor Rukmani said, I mean, there are these kind of clashes and change of guard, if you may call it. I mean, Bhishma, he represents one generation, and then Krishna's ethical paradigms, they may be considered to be the following generation. So for those of you who remember Sitangshu Chakravarti, he did speak at one of our past Vedanta conferences on this particular issue of how one can look at Bhishma and Krishna as two succeeding generations, etc. So, all right. So I see some questions on the chat box. Professor Rukmani, let me go ahead. So the first question from Professor Balram Singh is, was Bhishma sticking to his promise rather than loyal to the feeding hand? So
what? I don't understand what his promise was.
So when you say that when the question came and he said, well, I cannot really say anything because in Draupadi's case that he was silent, as you said. And the reason for his silence he gave was that, well, I am indebted to the Kauravas for feeding me. So the question is, was it his promise, his own promise, or was it this justification that he gave?
What promise did he? He didn't give any promise. He was just sitting there quiet.
No, he had promised to his father that he will be loyal to the king.
No, but then, oh, you're talking about that. No, but that was in a particular situation. Loyal to the king in the sense of not claiming the throne. That's it. But as far as a woman being insulted and, and very against an adharmic, the way she was insulted was by following an adharmic rule. So that I don't think should be applied here. At least it is.
My only question is whether it's because it was, I think Bhishma is bigger than feeding hand. I think attributing his behavior to feeding hand might not be.
I agree. Because one feels, there is a taratamya is not there. You cannot really, he is not a person who really depends on the king. That's what you're trying to say. Yeah. I agree. But maybe, I put it in a very crude manner. The words which are in the Mahabharata do not represent it that way. They're very, very euphemistic, as you know. So that is stated there in a context. If you feel like, please check it up. I can't give you the reference here, but it is very much there in the Mahabharata.
Okay, Professor Rukmini. The next question from Subhash Kak. Whether the opposition between Vedas and Buddhism has been overplayed because the Buddha in the Mahaparinirvana Sutra did acknowledge the Atman.
Well, let's not come to the philosophical. As you know, I was more interested in the ethical side. Like, Buddhism definitely, even though the Vedic literature also has Sarvabhutani na himsyat, you do have that statement. So that means do not, in the context of a sacrifice, only that which is allowed in a Vedic sacrifice can be sacrificed. So, na Sarvabhutani na himsyat. But at the same time, when it comes to Buddhist values, I think ahimsa and satya have been put on the pedestal, you see. And I think in that context, Buddhist values and Vedic values did have some clashes. Subhash, that's my view. But when it comes to a philosophical discussion, yes, I do agree, because there are many, you have all the 4 schools which have been referred to by Shankaracharya in his Brahma Sutra. So there is at least 2 schools which believe in the presence of Atman. So, not Atman, not in that state, but a different kind of conception. So yes, but that would be a purely, I would love to do a philosophical discussion on that.
Thank you so much. So the next question, Professor Rukmini, is a very broad question. It says, what is the ground of morality or ethics as per the Indian or Indic tradition?
No, I think I covered it in some manner, trying to, tie up the holistic approach as opposed to the individual approach. And this is something, dharmasya ragasyam nihitam guhayam, as you all know. You can never really dismantle or get it in a manner in which it can be crudely defined. No, I'm sorry.
So the next question is from, again, Professor Balram Singh. Is the system of dharma more important than individual dharma?
No, system of dharma, how do you define system of dharma? There is no system. Dharma is relative. It can either be relative to the individual or relative to, in a holistic sense, as the individual in a larger setting, the cosmos and the individual. So there is no, you cannot, it's not a standalone concept. Dharma is not a standalone concept. It is always in relation to. So it has to be some relation to something. So it cannot be a standalone concept.
Okay, Professor Rukmani, we have some time, so I will ask you a question. And that is, as I understand it, when we are faced with ethical dilemmas, then the Mahabharata says, well, look at what these great souls have done. Mahajano yena gatasta sapantha.
Yes.
Now, if, let's say, we have an ethical dilemma and we see two Mahajan, whom we consider Mahajan, taking diametrically opposite views, then what do we do?
Well, that's again situational. You have to then rely on your own intuition. That is where I would think that in a certain sense, it touches on Kant's practical reason. So you have to make a choice. I mean, there is no way that you cannot make a choice. Like the negative, in philosophy, we always say the negative argument is much more powerful than a positive argument. So here you cannot get away by not making a decision. So in that again will come under Matilal's situational ethics, because it's a moral dilemma, right? But you have to take a decision. So it'll have to be intuitive. There is no rational way of really coming to any conclusion there. I have no answer to that.
So, Professor Rukmani, what role does one's conduct play? I mean, conduct throughout, let's say, a period of time, sticking to all these rules that you said. What role does that play in making the right decision in an ethical dilemma? In other words, one's conduct, does it help in addressing ethical dilemmas?
Yes. Manu, for instance, says, there are 4 guidelines. One is your own, you read the Vedas, the Smritis. And then the third one is that you listen to wise people in your society. And then, of course, the fourth is very important and extremely intuitive, I should say. He says, you can also depend on what your conscience says. See? So probably there is this belief that when everything else fails, if you have been leading an ethical life, I mean, if you have followed and you have been honest enough to lead, a good life, when I say good, means a moral life, then your intuition will guide you to the right path. That is what Manu mentions.
Thank you so much. So we do have a few more minutes. If you
could I ask?
Sure. Go ahead, Professor Arpisi.
Thank you, Professor Rukmani. Very enlightening lecture. So since we have put emphasis on the Vedic culture and the Buddhist culture, in Vedic culture, we find there is hierarchy. Border system is hierarchical, and even the ritas are also constructed in that way. So, but Buddhist culture has equality. So how do you reconcile the two, the hierarchy and the equality, two very prime kind of value systems? Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So would you really bring it under the ethical issues? Because you see, you would. Okay. But I would rather, I thought that we could discuss it in a philosophical manner rather than in a dharmic situation, you see, because here there is no caste system. That's what you're not trying to say. Whereas the Varna system is very much in vogue. But by the time of the Mahabharata, you remember that there were the Sadharana. Why did the Sadharana dharmas come into force? Because the Varna dharmas were no more relevant. There have been many invasions. Other people have come into society. So the Varna dharma cannot have any more say. And that is, at least according to me, that is the reason that the Sadharana dharmas came into view. So here, if you there's a kind of level playing field, both for the Buddhists as well as the, Vedic people. Would you agree to that?
To a great extent, but the hierarchy still remains between Brahman, Kshatriya, Vaishya, Shudra, and the social hierarchy constructed.
No. Sadharana Dharma, the very word Sadharana is common Dharma for all people. I don't think that the hierarchy remains as far as the following of those dharmas are concerned. Of course,
putting it in a different manner, perhaps in the hierarchy you have the role of freedom playing very important role.
What playing?
Role of freedom. So freedom. You said intellectual freedom kind of stuff, and then social equality. So how freedom can be reconciled with equality?
Freedom can, why not? Why not? Are you denying freedom of thought for the one who is in the lower hierarchy? You have Vidura, who was born to a Shudra woman. Would you really condemn him because he's in a lower hierarchy? No, you have this, I forget the name in the Upanishad, you have this great, Shudra king, who again was a great thinker. So I don't think that is a valid argument.
I'm talking about Ekalavya, who was talented, but he was denied the opportunity.
Yes, there have been.
There are many such examples. Yeah.
No, that is definitely there. But we are not talking about the social injustice here. You see, my topic was to discuss the ethical issues which are prevalent and for which you can use many examples. Of course, if you want to take the overall picture of social injustice, there are many things everywhere, actually. Even in Buddhism, you will find that. So it's not as if it is a,
Yeah, thank you.
Very good. Thank you so much, Professor Rukmani, for agreeing to come and giving this enlightening talk and this very intense Q&A session. And as I said, whenever we get a chance to visit you in Bangalore, we will give you that plaque and the shawl. And again, thanks so much. And with that, we will move.
I have to unmute. I have to go because I think Subhash will be speaking now.
Yes.
I will mute myself, right?
Yes.